Hello, my name is Marisol. When I was 12, my father left me in a Walmart parking lot with nothing but a crumpled $10 bill. My mother sat in the passenger seat and never looked back. For years, they erased me. From family photos, from records, even from the inheritance that should have been mine. I was a ghost in my own bloodline. But what happens when the girl they abandoned grows into the woman who shakes hands with the governor right in front of them? Would you want to hear how that moment finally shattered their lies? I was 32 the day I could tell this without shaking. I had a job with badges, an apartment smelling of lemon cleaner. People introduced me with titles. Before I ever shook a governor's hand, I learned what it meant to be disposable. It started under a tired strip of Walmart neon in a Tennessee town. Summer heat sat on the lot. Our minivan stopped near the cart return. Grease from the fryer drifted through the sliding doors. We were quiet. My father kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward. My mother sat rigid with her purse on her lap, watching the dash. I remember quarters in the cup holder and the click of his tongue, the sound he made when a decision was sealed. "Run in and grab a snack," he said, still facing the windshield. He pressed a crumpled 10 into my palm. My mother didn't turn. I waited for a list, a joke, a sigh. Nothing. I opened the door. Heat rushed in, loud with a bad cartwheel. The pavement pushed through my sneakers. I stepped out and turned back because that is what children do. Confirm the people who brought you still want you. He shifted into reverse. For a breath, I thought he was straightening the car. The brake lights flared as the minivan eased away, then merged toward the exit. My mother's profile stayed fixed, an outline cut from paper. I touched air where glass had been. No screech, no scene. I stood with the 10 stuck to my palm and watched the taillights thread into traffic. I told myself it was a test. Maybe they'd loop the lot and tease me for worrying. 5 minutes, 10. The radio near the doors piped a cheerful song. A buggy clattered by, one wheel keening. A moth battered the neon and fell. Heat lifted off the asphalt. I moved to the curb and tucked my ankles under me the way the school nurse taught for tornado drills. 15 minutes and the word test went soft. 20, and the joke spoiled. Shame is a quiet animal. It circles first. I walked toward the sliding doors because standing still felt like confessing. Inside, air conditioning slapped. Fluorescence made everything too bright. I clutched the bill and tried to look like a girl whose parents had simply stepped away. I drifted past back-to-school displays, paused at a rack of candy I didn't want, listened for our name on the intercom. Only price checks and a call for a spill. "Evening," the greeter said. He was older than my grandfather, blue vest hanging loose. "Need a cart, honey?" "I'm fine," I said, too bright. "They'll be right back." He nodded like he'd heard it before. "Benches by the photo center are cooler if you're waiting." I sat with my knees together, though I wore shorts. I kept my eyes on the automatic doors, willing our van to bloom from the night. It didn't. Time misbehaves when a child performs bravery. Minutes grow feathers. I folded the 10 and unfolded it until the corners went satin. I thought about buying a candy bar to prove purpose. I thought about asking for a page, but the words tasted like failure. I thought about walking home along shoulders I didn't yet know. The greeter drifted over and rested both hands on his cane. "You want me to call anyone?" he asked, voice soft as hymnals. "My dad just had to get gas," I lied. "He'll swing back." He looked at my shoes, at the bill I'd smoothed too flat, and nodded the way grown men nod when a truth is a wall and a child needs a door. "All right, I'll keep an eye out." The loudspeaker announced closing in 30 minutes. The aisles thinned. When the lights blinked their warning, the greeter sent me a look that was a question he didn't want me to answer. Outside, heat pressed. Night flattened distance, so every pair of headlights was a maybe. I waited under the neon until the bugs learned my outline and accepted me as part of the sign. The world did not end. No alarm, no siren. What happened was smaller and therefore worse. The choice to leave me happened in the quiet. I felt it click shut like a lid. I did not cry. Children read rooms like weather. Tears make people step back. I measured the lot with my breath, counted spaces, memorized the exit so I'd know where not to look when I trimmed this story later to fit a grown woman's mouth. When pretending wore me out, I asked the greeter where the phone was. He pointed toward customer service and walked beside me without making it seem so. I dialed the only number I knew and listened to it ring until a recorded woman thanked me for my patience. A manager came, then a quiet woman from somewhere official, and then the questions I would hear for years. Name, age, anyone we can call, any allergies, sweetheart, are you safe with your parents? I answered what I could and held the rest like eggs. I can still draw the map of that night. Bench to doors to curb and back again, as if the floor were a page and a pencil dragged a slow, dark line over it. I was 12. I learned to stand so still a person could mistake me for display. I learned to smooth my face until adults relaxed. I learned that silence is a kind of paperwork. Years later, my voice would sit steady behind microphones in rooms with flags. People would call it poise. It was practiced under cheap fluorescence while I watched doors that never opened for me. That night didn't end in the parking lot. It ended later and later again, each time I found a new word for the same leaving and pretended it meant something different. It was only the beginning of the file my father thought he could erase. But before the file, before the paper trail, there was the long walk home that night. I left the Walmart doors behind me when the store began its closing rituals, lights flickering in warning, employees pushing carts of returns back to their places. I had outstayed my welcome in that bright box of air conditioning. The greeter had nodded at me with something like pity, and that nod made my stomach burn worse than hunger. I pushed through the doors, the August heat wrapping around me like a damp blanket. The $10 bill was still clutched in my palm, soft from the way I'd folded and unfolded it. I squeezed it as if it could prove I belonged somewhere. My sneakers slapped against the blacktop, and I felt the eyes of strangers prick at my back. I imagined they were wondering where my parents had gone, why a girl my age was leaving a store alone at night. Shame made me keep my chin up, pretending I had a purpose, pretending I wasn't scared. The first stretch of road was quiet, cicadas buzzing in the trees, the air thick with the smell of cut grass and gasoline from the highway. A moth bumped against a streetlight, circling until it dropped. I set one foot in front of the other, pretending it was just another walk after school. But the houses were farther apart here, the shadows longer, and every passing car carried the chance of humiliation. Headlights swept over me. A pickup slowed. Men's laughter spilled out the open window. "Hey, sweetheart, where you headed?" one called. I gripped the 10 tighter and stared at the ground, walking faster. Their engine idled beside me for a few feet. Another voice whistled, low and mocking. My skin prickled. For a second, I thought they might stop, that someone might step out. I darted behind a tree, pressing my back to its bark, trying to disappear into shadow. My breath held, heart drumming so loud I thought they'd hear it. The truck revved, laughter trailing behind as it pulled away. I stayed there long after the taillights vanished, waiting for silence to feel safe again. When I stepped back onto the road, my legs shook. But the night offered no kindness. The miles stretched ahead, the kind of dark that makes you feel small. I counted mailboxes to mark progress. By the time I reached our neighborhood, blisters had bloomed on my heels, and sweat glued my shirt to my back. Then I saw the house. No porch light, no welcome glow from the kitchen, just a block of dark sitting heavier than the night itself. My chest lifted. Maybe they'd come back, maybe the van was parked in the garage, but hope sagged as quickly as it rose. I climbed the steps, knuckles rapping soft at first. "Mom?" Silence. Harder this time. "Dad?" Still nothing. I pressed my ear to the door. Inside, I caught the faint sound of dishes clinking, a muffled voice. They were there. They heard me. They just chose not to answer. The doorknob stayed locked beneath my hand. My throat tightened, but no sound came out. It wasn't the kind of anger that explodes. It was the kind that sinks, cold and certain. I knocked again until my fist ached, until I couldn't tell if the ringing in my ears was from the blows or my pulse. Finally, I lowered myself onto the porch swing. It creaked under my small weight. The night hummed with crickets, and fireflies winked over the lawn, uncaring. I tucked my knees to my chest and hugged them. Hunger gnawed, fear pressed close, but louder than both was a new thought. I couldn't trust them. Not really. I stayed there until the world blurred, the swing rocking me into a shallow, broken sleep. And in that silence, more cutting than any slammed door, something in me shifted for good. That night, I learned silence could be louder than a slammed door. Years later, I'd recognize that silence again, this time written in my school records. When they moved me out of the house I was born into, there wasn't ceremony. A state car pulled up. A woman with folders walked me out while my mother kept washing dishes. She didn't turn. My father stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression blank. That was their goodbye. The first foster home smelled like bleach and fried food. A chart of rules was taped to the refrigerator, each line typed in capital letters. Don't leave dishes in the sink. No phones after 9. Chores must be signed off. 4 other kids crowded the hallway, each one quick to stake claim over the little things. A blanket on the couch, the last packet of ramen, the single remote control. I learned fast to shrink myself. Don't ask. Don't compete. Don't need. To them, I was just another obligation. Meals were counted, beds assigned, and love wasn't part of the budget. School wasn't a refuge. Teachers glanced over me, eyes sliding past my desk to the louder kids. My last name became a whisper. The girl whose family didn't want her. Some kids thought it was funny, some pitied me, but none sat next to me at lunch. I filled notebook margins with swirls, practiced keeping my head down. Invisibility became a skill. Then came English class. I turned in an essay about cicadas, how they lived underground for years, and then emerged into a world that barely noticed them. It wasn't good, not really. I wrote it half asleep with the TV on in the foster house. But when Mr. Alden Rourke, the part-time instructor from the community college, handed back my paper, he didn't give me a grade right away. He lingered by my desk, tapping the page with a pen. "You write like you've lived 3 lifetimes," he said quietly, so the others wouldn't hear. I stared at him, unsure if it was praise or pity. After class, he waited until the room emptied. He handed me a plain, spiral-bound notebook, the kind you could buy in packs of 5 during back-to-school sales. On the inside cover, written in neat blue ink, were 5 words. Don't let them write your ending. I carried that notebook home like it was contraband. That night, while the other kids fought over who got the bathroom first, I curled against the dim glow of a lamp and wrote, not poems or polished essays, just words that had nowhere else to go. The paper listened when people didn't. The house still smelled like bleach. The fridge rules still glared in capital letters. But I had something that couldn't be taken away. Each night I wrote more. Memories of the Walmart parking lot, the silence on my porch, the way my parents' shadows moved behind curtains while I knocked. Every page was proof that I existed, that my life wasn't just a file someone could lose in a cabinet. It was the first time I felt something push back against the erasure. Not anger yet, not even defiance. Just a seed, a whisper of resistance. I didn't know then that the notebook would outlast every lie my family told. That same year, I learned how quickly a foster kid could disappear, not from records, but from memory. Her name was Leora Hask. She was small, wiry, always fidgeting with her sleeves like she was trying to disappear inside the fabric. We ended up in the same foster placement for a while. She had the same dead look I sometimes caught in the mirror, a mixture of waiting and giving up. At first, we tried to carve a corner of the world for ourselves. Whispered jokes at night, passing gum wrappers folded into shapes. But Leora's laughter thinned with every missed phone call, every time the foster parents shook their heads and said, "Some kids just don't make it." She started skipping school, then not coming home at all. By 16, she was gone, swallowed by drugs, men too old, choices that looked like escape but were just another kind of prison. I hated her for leaving me behind. I hated her for making it too easy to imagine myself in her place. At school, my invisibility turned into humiliation by comparison. Teachers held up shining examples, and somehow my sister's name was always in the air. "Isn't that your sister? The golden one?" someone whispered in homeroom. Isolde Crane, my older sister, the one who stayed in the house I was forced out of, the one whose smile filled the church bulletin. She earned honor cords and community awards. I learned to catch my name paired with hers only in whispers, pity edged with disdain. Once in history class, my teacher praised her essay from the year before, unaware that I was her sibling. A model student, he said, a credit to her family. My chest burned hot, and I scribbled angry lines in the margin of my notebook. Family. The word sliced sharper than any insult. The world beyond the school walls agreed. One afternoon, I came home to the Foster kitchen and saw a clipping pinned with a magnet to the fridge, a photo of Isolde in a satin dress, arm in arm with our father at some charity gala. The headline read, "Local Family Gives Back." I stood there long enough for the refrigerator hum to sound like laughter. I wanted to rip the picture down, shred it, scream. Instead, I pulled my notebook closer that night and pressed the pen so hard the tip tore paper. They had erased me. In their story, I was already gone, but I wasn't. Lyora's face haunted me, her vanishing act a constant warning. I could not let myself dissolve the way she did. So I wrote harder. Each page was a pulse, proof that I existed, proof that I would not vanish no matter how many fridges displayed my sister's perfect smile. The foster parents didn't notice, or didn't care, that I stayed up until dawn. To them, I was quiet, compliant, the easiest kind of child to forget. But on those pages, I was loud, I was furious, I was alive. What I didn't know then was that their spotlight would one day burn them, and I'd be holding the match. The first flame lit when I discovered my name missing from the records that were supposed to prove I belonged. I was 18, standing in line at the admissions office of a small state college, holding my folder like it was armor. Everyone around me buzzed with talk of majors and dorm assignments, the smell of new pencils and printer paper thick in the air. When it was my turn, the clerk scanned my paperwork, then frowned. "Honey, I can't find your birth certificate in the state files." She clicked again, then again. "Are you sure you brought the right documents?" Heat rushed up my neck. I handed her everything I had: social security card, immunization record, even a battered library card. She shook her head slowly. "It's like you don't exist." The words hit harder than I expected. For a moment, I was 12 again, standing in the Walmart parking lot with a $10 bill, waiting for headlights that never came back. I left the office with a hollow ache and the sound of other students laughing in the hallway. Their parents carried boxes of dorm supplies. I carried a void. I decided not to let it go. The courthouse archives smelled of dust and stale coffee, the kind of place where secrets hid in file drawers. I told the clerk I needed to verify my documents for college. He handed me a stack of ledgers and pointed me toward a creaking table. Hours passed as I flipped through pages, my finger tracing column after column of names until I found a blank where mine should have been. A gap, a space that should have held Marisol Faye Delling. Instead, it was a smudge, an erasure. They didn't just abandon me, I whispered to myself. They rewrote me out of existence. I asked the clerk if revisions were ever made. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Sometimes parents file amendments. Depends on what they're trying to cover. With his help, I dug deeper. Buried under years of filings, one form bore a familiar hand. The sharp, deliberate signature of Arthur Delling. My father. It wasn't just a birth record, it was a legal declaration filed at the county courthouse removing my name from the family's inheritance documents. My chest tightened as I read the cold phrasing. Name struck, not entitled to benefits or claims. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't neglect, it was intent. I photocopied every page, the machine humming like a witness. Sliding the papers into my notebook, I felt the weight of them, heavier than any textbook I'd ever carry. They weren't just proof of betrayal, they were proof that I existed, no matter how hard they tried to erase me. I didn't scream, I didn't storm the courthouse. I walked out quietly, the late summer air pressing down on me. But inside, the fire spread. If they could erase me on paper, they thought they could erase me forever. But paper cuts both ways. The cuts deepened when my mother finally opened her mouth. Not to defend me, but to defend him. I had asked her to meet me in my small apartment near campus. A cramped space with secondhand furniture and humming pipes. I thought maybe, away from him, away from their world, she would see me. I spread the photocopies across the table, the ones bearing Arthur's signature, proof. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling but steady enough to be heard, "why did you let him do this? Why did you let him erase me?" Alora didn't look at the papers. Her eyes darted around the apartment, pausing on the chipped mug, the peeling paint on the wall. Finally, she sighed. "It's for the family's good, Marisol. Some sacrifices are necessary." I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Sacrifice. That was the word she chose to explain away my disappearance. Not mistake. Not regret. Sacrifice. The woman who carried me for 9 months, who once brushed my hair while humming kitchen hymns, now folded her hands in her lap and chose him. She didn't just stay silent anymore. She chose his story over mine. I wanted to scream, but the sound stuck in my chest. Instead, I listened to the radiator hiss like it was mocking me. Every second stretched long and cruel. By the time she left, I wasn't crying. I was cold. A hollow had opened in me, where her love should have been. Days later, I forced myself to attend a charity event where Isolde was speaking. I told myself it was research, a way to understand how they spun their story without me. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers, the air thick with perfume and polite laughter. Isolde took the podium in a dress that shimmered under the lights. The room hushed. Then she began to speak. Words I recognized immediately. They were mine. Phrases lifted from the notebook I once showed her when we were teenagers. Sentences about resilience, about community, about the invisible children who deserve to be seen. She strung them together as if they were hers, her voice full of confidence, the audience nodding, clapping. Behind her, Arthur stood in a tailored suit, his hand resting proudly on her shoulder for the cameras. The flashbulbs popped, catching the practiced smiles. I stayed at the back, unnoticed, invisible as ever. Each cheer for her was an echo of what I'd lost. Each photograph of them together was another nail in the coffin of the girl they'd buried alive without digging dirt. But something shifted inside me. I realized then that I would never let them use me again. My words, my life, my story, they would no longer be props for their shining image. I started small, submitting pieces to community newsletters, volunteering to speak at local centers, lending my voice where it mattered. Nobody applauded like they did for Isolde, but it was mine. The pages, the podiums, the quiet rooms where someone finally listened, they were mine. If they thought my silence meant surrender, they hadn't learned how dangerous a quiet witness could be. That danger began to take shape the day I started collecting proof, one piece of paper at a time. I remember the smell of the county archives, dust mixed with toner and old coffee. The clerk barely looked at me when I filled out the request slip, just pointed me toward a stack of folders that felt heavier than they should have been. My hands shook as I opened them, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of possibility. There it was, property transfers where my name should have been, school rosters with a faint line crossing me out, court filings that listed only Isolde, over and over, as though a careful hand had erased me in pencil, rewriting the story of our family one form at a time. I started photocopying each page. The sound of the machine hummed in rhythm with my heartbeat. Each sheet that slid into my backpack felt like a stolen truth, something I wasn't supposed to see. When I left, the Tennessee sun outside seemed too bright, like it might expose the secrets I carried. Back at my apartment, I hid the growing file under my mattress, careful to wrap it in a grocery bag so no curious visitor would notice. At work, I saved copies to a flash drive labeled with boring tax forms, leaving it in my desk drawer among paper clips and sticky notes. By day, I smiled and answered emails, a young woman paying rent and holding down a job. By night, I was a detective in my own life, piecing together the puzzle of my erasure. It wasn't just paperwork I wanted. It was validation. I needed proof that I hadn't imagined the Walmart parking lot, the locked door, the silence that followed me like a second skin. One evening, I found myself standing at the edge of Melis's porch. She had been our neighbor for years, the kind of woman who kept her lawn perfect, and waved politely but never lingered. Something inside me pushed me up the steps, my file clutched tight against my chest. When she opened the door, her eyes widened. "Marisol," she said softly, like she was seeing a ghost. I asked her straight out, my voice steadier than I felt. "That night, did you see what happened at Walmart?" For a long moment, the only sound was the creak of the porch swing in the evening breeze. Then she sank into a chair and rubbed her temples. "I saw it," she whispered. "I was parked 2 rows over. I saw your father hand you that bill. I saw the taillights fade. And Her voice broke. "I stayed quiet. He told us all to. He said it was family business, not ours." The words landed harder than any blow. My father hadn't just abandoned me. The town had watched, turned their heads, decided my disappearance was easier than their discomfort. I felt sick, but also sharper than I'd ever been. If they could normalize my erasure, if they could call abandonment family business, then the only way to fight was to drag every shadow into the light. I left her porch with the sound of cicadas rattling in my ears, a chorus that felt more like judgment than comfort. In my bag, the papers shifted like restless ghosts, demanding I keep going. The lies had been airtight for 20 years, until the cracks began showing in their own walls. Those cracks split wide open the night I stood in the same room as the governor. The invitation had arrived weeks earlier in a cream-colored envelope embossed with the state seal. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Why would anyone in government want me there? My name had been erased from records, scrubbed from paper trails, and shoved out of family photographs. And yet, there it was in bold letters. "Ms. Marisol Fay, you are cordially invited to the governor's gala." I must have read it a dozen times before I let myself believe it was real. I traced my fingers over the heavy cardstock, feeling the ridges of my name as if proof that, after all these years, I existed, not just in quiet notebooks or hidden photocopies tucked under my mattress, but in a space that demanded recognition. For the first time, someone with authority had written me in instead of writing me out. I didn't have the kind of wardrobe women wore to these things, no glittering gowns or diamonds to borrow. I chose a modest navy dress I had saved for job interviews, one that hugged close but not tight. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I slipped my old notebook into my handbag. I needed it near me, my anchor, my proof, the witness that had followed me through every silence. When I arrived at the governor's mansion in Nashville, the sight nearly stole my breath. Lights spilled from chandeliers through tall windows, illuminating a crowd already gathering. Black cars pulled up in lines, men in tuxedos stepping out beside women shimmering in silk and satin. Flashbulbs cracked like tiny lightning bolts as reporters jostled for photographs. For a moment, I considered turning back. I could almost hear my father's voice. "You don't belong in places like this." But my heels carried me forward anyway. Each step was steadier than the one before. Inside, the ballroom swelled with music from a string quartet. Servers glided between guests carrying silver trays of wine and hors d'oeuvres. Names floated through the air. Judges, business owners, lawmakers. I kept close to the edges of the room, watching, listening. My heart thudded in my chest as though it knew a collision was near. And then, I saw them. Arthur's graying hair was slicked back, his suit pressed to perfection. Elara wore a gown in pale green that seemed to drain the warmth from her already distant face. And Isolde, my sister, stood between them like a jewel polished for display. Her smile flashed toward the cameras, her arm looped through our father's, her hand lifting gracefully as though she were royalty greeting her subjects. My throat tightened. The Delling family, whole and perfect, exactly as they had always wanted the world to see them. Only this time, their secret was standing across the room in plain view. I stepped out from the shadows, guided by one of the event organizers toward the reception line. My palms were slick, but I didn't falter. Cameras swiveled, catching the movement. Guests murmured, a few whispering my name. They knew me from the nonprofit work I'd been doing in the city. Not as a daughter, not as someone erased, but as a professional who had earned her own way here. Arthur's eyes found me first. He froze, his smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. It was subtle, but in front of cameras, every slip becomes permanent. Alora blinked rapidly, as if she had seen a ghost. Isolde's lips tightened, her polished mask cracking at the edges. I walked past them with my head high, my heels clicking on marble, each sound echoing like a gavel. My body shook with nerves, but I held on to one truth. This was no accident. I had been invited. I belonged here. I hadn't even shaken the governor's hand yet, and already my family's faces told me the reckoning had begun. And the reckoning came in full when the cameras caught what happened next. I had felt the ballroom buzz shift the moment my eyes met theirs. Arthur's rigid posture, Alora's quick turn of her head, and Isolde's frozen smile. But it wasn't just us anymore. The air between us belonged to the room, to the clicking shutters, to the flashing bulbs that refused to miss a beat. Arthur's jaw flexed as if he could hold his story together by sheer force of will. He tried to keep his expression neutral, the same way he probably had all those years ago when he signed the papers that made me a ghost. But this wasn't a courthouse backroom or a quiet dinner table. This was a ballroom under chandeliers, and every flash of a camera stripped another layer of his facade. Alora's eyes never touched mine. She smoothed the fabric of her dress, looked past me as though I were just another guest, a stranger, passing in the crowd. That indifference hurt worse than Arthur's stiff denial. She wasn't even fighting me anymore. She was pretending I wasn't there. And then there was Isolde. My sister stood only a few feet away, smiling too brightly for the cameras that surrounded her. I knew that smile. It was the one she wore when she lied, when she dressed herself in other people's words, even mine. For years she had borrowed pieces of me while denying my existence. Now the cameras saw both of us at once, the glossy version she presented and the woman she'd tried to erase. Photographers called out for angles, reporters whispered questions. I didn't move. I didn't have to. My silence this time wasn't surrender, it was defiance. Then the crowd parted slightly and the governor himself began walking toward me. Conversations hushed, cameras repositioned. I felt my knees threaten to weaken, but I steadied myself with the thought of every long night on porches, every notebook page, every slammed door I had survived. He stopped in front of me, his presence commanding yet warm, and then without hesitation he extended his hand. "Marisol Faye," he said clearly, loud enough for the microphones nearby. "It's good to finally meet you." Gasps rippled. Flashes went off in staccato bursts, catching Arthur's stunned expression, Alora's pale face, Isolde's quivering smile. When I placed my hand in his, the weight of it was more than formality. It was recognition, a restoration. The governor wasn't just greeting me. He was acknowledging me before the world, erasing every lie my family had tried to cement. Arthur shifted, his lips parting as if to object. A reporter turned instantly, microphone extended. "Mr. Delling, care to comment on your daughter?" His mouth opened and closed, no sound strong enough to fill the gap. Alora clutched at her pearls as though they could anchor her in place. Isolde looked like porcelain cracking under heat, the tremor in her smile betraying her fear that her story had been pierced. And me? I didn't need to say a word. My presence, validated by the governor, was the answer. I thought of all the years when I had been invisible, in classrooms, in court records, at the very door of my own house. Tonight, I was undeniable. "They spent years erasing me on paper," I whispered inside my own head, steadying my breath as the handshake held. Tonight, I became permanent in memory. The cameras didn't lie. They caught every second of my family's silence, their humiliation, their unraveling. For once, I wasn't the girl left behind in a parking lot. I was the woman standing tall in front of the state's leader, and nothing they could say would erase that image burned into the public record. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't the final reckoning. A handshake was powerful, yes, but I had something even stronger waiting, proof. Pages they thought would never see the light. The night was theirs to squirm under the glare of cameras, but the true blow hadn't landed yet. It would come when the papers I kept finally surfaced. Those papers were more than proof. They were weapons, and I was ready to use them. For years they had slept in silence, tucked between notebook pages, folded flat and hidden under the weight of other words. Copies of copies, grainy but undeniable, stamped with dates and signatures. I carried them like scars no one could see. Tonight, though, the time for hiding was over. While the ballroom glittered with polite laughter and the string quartet's music, I slipped into a side corridor where reporters hovered near the press table. My palms trembled, but not from fear, from the steady hum of purpose. I pulled an envelope from my bag, the same envelope that had traveled with me through dorm rooms, foster homes, and nights of hunger. A journalist I recognized from the local paper turned at my approach. "Miss Fay?" he asked, surprised I knew his name. I pressed the envelope into his hand. "Read these," I whispered. "Then ask them the right questions." Inside were photocopies of everything. The court filing where my father had struck my name from inheritance records, the altered birth record that made it appear I was never his child, the revisions in school documents that had left me drifting without a past. Every lie they told was inked in black and white, sealed by Arthur's signature. It didn't take long. The first ripple spread when I saw the reporter's brows shoot upward as he flipped through the pages. Then another joined him, and another. In less than 10 minutes, the envelope had multiplied into a dozen hands. The ballroom, still shimmering with false civility, began to tighten like a net. Cameras swiveled away from the governor's polished smile and turned back toward my family. Arthur stood stiff at the edge of the crowd, his lips pressed thin. Alora's gaze darted nervously across the room. Isolde tried to hold her stage-ready smile, but the tremor in her lip betrayed her. A reporter raised his voice above the hum. "Mr. Delling, care to explain why your daughter's name appears removed from these legal filings?" The silence that followed was heavier than any slammed door. Arthur stammered, searching for words. "That's those documents." But microphones pushed closer, cameras flashing so fast the room seemed to strobe. Alora clutched his arm, whispering something sharp into his ear. But the reporters had already surrounded them. "Did you knowingly erase your daughter's identity?" one asked. "Was this a coordinated effort to deny her inheritance?" another demanded. Arthur's face reddened, his polished mask slipping under the weight of evidence. He opened his mouth again, but the reporter thrust forward a page with his signature clear as day. "Is this your handwriting, sir?" The room tilted. Donors whispered, pulling back. One couple who had entered smiling at him minutes ago now turned their backs. Guests avoided eye contact, drifting away as though scandal were contagious. Isolde tried to step forward, laughing lightly. There must be some mistake. But her voice cracked, and the photographers caught it. The cameras drank in every detail. The sweat at Arthur's brow, Alora's paling cheeks, Isolde's faltering charm. The image of the perfect family collapsed in real time, broadcast with each shutter click. I didn't move. I didn't have to. The papers spoke louder than I ever could. Inside, my chest tightened with 20 years of memories. The Walmart parking lot, the porch where no one opened the door, the foster homes that treated me like luggage passed between stations. Tonight, those ghosts stepped into the light. They were no longer shadows stalking only me. They were stains now visible to everyone. I glanced once at the governor, who observed the chaos with a furrowed brow, then back at the cluster of reporters. My voice wasn't needed. My proof was louder than any accusation. "They thought they could erase me on paper," I whispered to myself, steady and calm. But paper cuts both ways. And now, those cuts bled in public view. The ballroom no longer shimmered. It pulsed with the sound of voices rising, cameras clicking, reputations unraveling. For once, the wounds weren't mine anymore. The papers cut deep that night. But the wounds weren't mine anymore. By the next morning, the world finally saw my family for who they really were. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing against the nightstand. Notifications stacked one on top of another, texts, emails, news alerts. I rubbed my eyes, reached for my glasses, and opened the first headline. Businessman Arthur Delling erased his own daughter, documents show. The words blinked back at me in bold letters, running across a photo taken at the gala, Arthur's face looked red and cornered, Elora pale at his side, Isolde frozen in that brittle smile, and behind them, the governor's hand clasping mine. Other outlets followed quickly. Delling legacy in question. Governor seen with daughter erased from records. Arthur Delling silent as evidence mounts. Each one felt like a page being turned in a book I never thought the world would read. By noon, his empire had cracked wide open. The law firm he partnered with announced it was severing ties. Longtime donors withdrew support from his pet charities. Friends who once toasted him at galas offered no comment. For years, Arthur had built his house of glass. Last night, the first stone was thrown. I sat in my little apartment, a chipped mug of coffee warming my hands. Outside, the city moved as it always did. Cars honking, children yelling on their way to school, a delivery truck rumbling down the street, but inside, something had shifted. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel invisible. I was tired, though, not from regret, but from the release of carrying something heavy too long. I thought about my younger self, 12 years old, standing on hot asphalt outside Walmart, clutching a $10 bill, waiting for headlights that never came. That girl had been told in every way that she didn't matter. Now the world knew otherwise. The phone rang again, but this time it wasn't another alert. It was a number I recognized before I even answered. My mother. I pressed accept, my voice steadier than I expected. Hello? Her tone was clipped, polite, like she was calling a neighbor. Marisol. I waited. You've made your point, she said. The headlines are everywhere. Arthur can't step outside without reporters shouting at him. If this continues, we'll lose everything. Her words hung in the air, not an apology, not a question of how I was, just a plea to protect their name. My throat tightened, but I didn't let my voice shake. You're not calling because you regret what you did. You're calling because you're embarrassed people finally saw it. She inhaled sharply, but she didn't deny it. Sometimes sacrifices are necessary. You don't understand the pressure we were under. I almost laughed. I understand perfectly. You chose him. You always chose him. Even now. Silence stretched across the line. I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow. Then she said, softer, but still empty. Stop feeding the fire, Marisol. Let us move on. I closed my eyes. For a moment I felt 12 again, knocking on a locked door while she sat inside, pretending not to hear me, but this time I wasn't the girl left shivering on the porch. I was the woman holding the truth, and the truth no longer belonged to them. She still didn't choose me, I whispered to myself after I hung up. Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't the same kind I used to cry. These were tears of release, of letting go of the hope that she'd ever be different. For so long, I thought vindication would come from hearing her say, I'm sorry. Now I knew I didn't need those words. My story had already been told, my existence already carved into memory. The world was finally listening. But I still had one more truth to tell. That truth wasn't about my father's cruelty. It was about my own survival. For years, I thought the story ended with the locked door, the erasure, the silence. But the truth had lived inside me all along, scratched onto pages that no one else cared to read. In the aftermath of the gala, after the headlines, after the collapse of Arthur's public mask, I knew it was time, not to wound them further, but to free myself. I opened the old box I'd carried from foster homes, dorm rooms, apartments. Inside were the notebooks, edges frayed, pages curled, ink sometimes smudged with tears or drizzle from a stormy walk. I read the words of my 12-year-old self, trembling handwriting. I waited for the car lights. They didn't come back. I contacted a journalist who had treated me with respect during the frenzy, someone who listened more than they spoke. I don't want you to spin it, I told her. I just want people to see it as it was, through the eyes of a child. She promised to publish them without edits. The next morning, my journals appeared online. Scans of crumpled letters to a mother who never answered, fragments of poems written under a flashlight, pages where I begged the universe to tell me I wasn't invisible. Those words, unpolished, raw, soaked with the voice of a girl nobody wanted, cut deeper than any legal document ever could. The response was immediate. Strangers wrote letters and emails. I see you. I went through the same. Thank you for saying what I never could. My small mailbox overflowed with envelopes from people across the country, many older than me who carried scars from their own silences. Meanwhile, the silence in my family grew heavier. Arthur stopped showing his face in public. Elora was seen once, head down, avoiding reporters. Isolde's once glittering calendar of appearances went blank. They had built their lives on stage lights and applause. Now every spotlight burned. And me? I sat in my apartment, the same chipped mug in hand, and felt a strange calm. For so long I had wondered if telling my story would leave me hollow, stripped of privacy. Instead, I felt whole. I wasn't the erased daughter anymore. I wasn't the forgotten sister. I was the author of my own survival. Calls came, of course. Numbers I knew, messages left that I didn't answer. We can explain. It's time to talk. But reconciliation on their terms wasn't reconciliation at all. It was another erasure. This time, I didn't pick up. One afternoon, I walked to the local park, journal in hand. Children played on the swings, their laughter spilling into the warm air. I sat on a bench beneath an oak tree, opened a fresh page, and wrote. I thought revenge would feel like fire. Instead, it feels like air. For the first time, I can breathe. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with colors I couldn't name. I closed the notebook, let the breeze flip through its empty pages. I realized I didn't need to fill them all. Some stories could end, and in their ending, give me back my life. They left me in a parking lot. I left them in the past. Looking back, I've learned that survival isn't just about enduring the cruelty of others. It's about choosing, day by day, not to let their silence define you. My story wasn't easy to tell, but it became proof that the past does not own the future. In America, we often say family is everything. But sometimes, real strength comes from creating the family we deserve. Through friendship, community, and the courage to believe in ourselves when no one else does. If you've ever felt overlooked, erased, or told you didn't matter, I want you to hear me clearly. You do matter. Your voice, your story, and your resilience are powerful. Healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means standing tall and refusing to be written out of your own life. Now I'd like to ask you, have you ever faced a moment when you felt invisible? How did you find your way through it? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched you, drop a 1 or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't connect with it, let me know why. I truly want to hear your perspective. Most of all, if you want to hear more stories that inspire, challenge, and connect us, please subscribe to the channel. Your support means we can keep telling the kinds of stories that remind us all. The past may shape us, but it never has to define us.